Turkish Cultural Center is proud to screen the Prince Among Slaves film screening today, and we have great people with us, and I would like to acknowledge those wonderful people with us. Dean Dr. Michael Attendorfer from NYIT School of Education. I would like to acknowledge Mr. Zeki Gebelis from Unity Production Foundation. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Gomez from NYU. Our two panelists, Mr. Eric Tait and Imam Yusuf Ramadan. I know we don't, we are a little bit, tight with time. So what I would like to do, I would like to call upon Dr. Dean Michael Attendorfer for his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Mehmet. On behalf of New York Institute of Technology, and in particular our School of Education, where I have the pleasure of being the Dean, I'd like to welcome you to this special screening of Prince Among Slaves. I'd also like to thank Mehmet Kelik and the Turkish Cultural Center for giving us this opportunity to partner on such an important event. NYT has been very fortunate over the last few years to have numerous events shared with the Turkish Cultural Center, including several dinners, a film series that we've run, the 9/11 commemoration event, and also student trips taking some of our graduate students to Turkey on cultural exchange programs, all with the aid of the Turkish Cultural Center. Last November, we had the privilege of screening this same film at our auditorium on Broadway, and to a packed house. It was great to see that so many people came out, students, faculty, members of the local community were part of the event. And by the time I got home that evening, I figured I might take one last look at my emails just to make sure that everything is okay. And usually when the dean's email box is full, there's a major problem going on someplace. So I opened one email, and it was just a comment from a student who had attended the event. Another email was a faculty member who was singing the praises of not only the film, but of the panel discussion that took place afterwards. So I was able to relax a little bit, figured I could read the rest of the emails in the morning, and was so delighted though to see the response of our students and our faculty and the community to such an important film. At the School of Education, part of our mission is to prepare teachers to deal with students of all different types. Our schools are enriched by the diversity of ethnic, cultural, religious diversity, and others. In today's global society, we try to make sure that our teachers are prepared to deal with students and support students from all different cultures. You'll see tonight the strength that comes from not giving up on your beliefs and your values. And that's a very important lesson that we try to encourage our students to adopt. I'm sure you'll be as inspired as our last meeting group was with both the film itself and the panel discussion that will follow. So have a wonderful evening. You're going to be very, very inspired by what you see.
Thank you, Dean Attendorfer. Now I would like to call upon Mr. Zeki Gebelis from Unity Production Foundation to give his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Mehmet. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming out on a Friday night and participating at this film screening and dialogue event. My name is Zeki again. I work with Unity Productions Foundation. We're the filmmakers of Prince Among Slaves. I would like to also thank Turkish Cultural Center and NYIT School of Education for partnering with us in hosting this event tonight. I'll just try to give you a brief information about Unity Productions Foundation, who we are and what we do. We are first and foremost documentary filmmakers. We've made 8 documentary films since 2000, and one of them being Prince Among Slaves. We show these documentaries in many dialogue events. So far, we have hosted about 20,000 dialogues nationwide. And this is the latest project that we have, funded by National Endowment for the Humanities. We have been doing this for about 12 months. This is our 15th event funded by the same group. And actually this is the last one to do it, and we're actually finalizing the project with you guys tonight. Just a little bit of our, about our Hollywood engagement. Just to tell you, besides making films, we're actually trying to work with producers and directors in Hollywood and changing the ways that they make films about people of different faiths and backgrounds. Especially for Muslims, we have an initiative called Muslims on Screen and Television, where we work with producers of shows such as Bones, 24. One of our clients was also Simpsons last year. They were able to actually add in one of their episodes a Muslim family visiting the Simpson family and having a Thanksgiving dinner together. It's a pretty funny episode. I would like you to all go and check it out. I'm sure it's online and you can find it. Well, just coming to the film, I don't want to spoil the film or anything, but the film was made in 2007, and after Professor Tara Alford wrote a book about the story of Prince Abdul Rahman. It is a true story of this man from Timbuktu, West Africa. He was a prince, and he was enslaved and brought to United States. And this is an incredible story about this incredible man who endured the humility of slavery all his life without losing his dignity or his faith. And I hope you will like the film. And I would like to also let you know about the dialogue component of this night. Right after following the event, we're going to be talking and having a panel, and we would like to hear a lot from you, questions and comments, and it's a dialogue event, so we want you to talk to each other as well, and Mehmet Bey will be giving you more information about that. And one last thing, we have some free DVDs tonight. Who would like to receive free DVDs? Obviously everyone. I make this joke a lot, so well, there's no free lunch, so we gotta have something. There's gotta be a catch. So the catch is that it's simple. We have a very simple requirement. It is the idea is to spread the dialogue, not just to end it tonight, but actually you do the dialogue with your friends and family and neighbors. Invite your Muslim and non-Muslim and African American or from other backgrounds people together. Maybe not like Turkish Cultural Center or NYIT does. Hundreds of people come together, but at least you, with your friends, 3 to 5 people, if you get together at a cafe, at your house, at a library, and watch one of the UPF films. Tonight we'll be sharing with you Prince Among Slaves and dialogue about it. And actually, if you like it, we'll be sharing with you the other UPF films. And if you could also make dialogues with them, we would really appreciate it. So please sit back and enjoy the film. I think there will be some keynote speaker coming right now and giving you more detailed information about the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Govelis. He said, this is the last program of the project, but however, it doesn't mean that this is the last program of Prince Among Slaves, as he mentioned. We're planning to screen this program again in Long Island. And also I've talked with some wonderful people from NAACP, so they're planning to screening in a different venue, which Beverly is here. And I've met some other people from the Harlem Historical Society. So it's open for dialogue, for screening in different venues. So if you are willing to do that and you would like to share our experiences, and we could help you organize the event in different venues. So we're open for this, the Turkish Cultural Center, NYIT, and also Unity Production Foundation. We can help you with speakers, keynote speakers, and any other material that you would need. Now, this is our first and last call to silence our cell phones at this time. We're starting our program. Before we watch the Prince Among Slaves, I would like to invite our keynote speaker to give deeper understanding of the film and the enslaved African American experience in the Americas. But please, just allow me to read his biography. It's fascinating biography of our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Gomez. Dr. Michael Gomez is currently Professor of History and Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at New York University. Having served as the Director of the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora from its inception in 2000 to 2007. He has also served as chair of the history department at both NYU and Spelman College, and served as the president of UNESCO's International Scientific Committee for the Slave Root Project from 2009 to 2011. Now I'd like to show you some of his publications. I know you're going to be asking the question, how can we learn more about this? So these are his publications. His first publication was Pragmatism, Pragmatism in the Age of Jihad, the Pre-Colonial State of Uganda, in 1992. Exchanging Our Country Marks, and the next one is Revising Sale, and the other one is Diasporic Africa, Black Crescent, and also he's working on a new book which is coming soon. We're so excited to hear about it. Primarily a cultural and a social historian of both Africa and its diaspora, Dr. Gomez is currently in the writing stages of a book on the history of early and medieval West Africa with a focus on Imperial Songhai. Upon its completion, he plans to write a comprehensive study of the African diaspora, within which he will address all attendant arguments and debates. Maybe he could include some of your questions that will arise over here. Throughout, he will remain connected to the Arabic manuscript project underway in Mali, arguably one of the most important endeavors to develop in the 20th and the 21st centuries. He continues to work with these as well as other organizations invested in the struggles of people of African descent worldwide, and especially looks forward to exciting opportunities developing in Latin America. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Gomez.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, I will be brief because our time is constrained. And I want to thank the Turkish Cultural Center, NYIT. It's good to see Zeki once again. Mehmet Kilik. I want to thank you for coming out this evening on a Friday evening to discuss this very important topic. What I'd like to do is to give some context for the film. The film will concern one individual who emerges out of the West African context of, is it okay if I stand on this thing? Okay. Emerges out of the West African context in what is now the contemporary country of Guinea. It comes out of an area here in the Massif of Guinea, or the highlands of Guinea, known as Fouta-Djallon. And Fouta-Djallon is a composite term which refers to both the Fulbe and the Jalanke, two ethnicities who inhabit this area. And what the film reifies is that of the 12 to 15 million Africans who are conservatively estimated to have been exported into or imported into the New World during the transatlantic slave trade from the 15th century through the 19th century. Thousands, tens of thousands of Muslims were also among those groups of people. And this is a story that is not well known or not well told within the telling of slavery in the Americas. And Fouta-Djallon, or the area, so there are several major regions out of which Muslims, African Muslims, will emerge, will be exported out of Africa into the Americas. And the principal regions are Senegambia, which is this area here. I'm sorry that you can't see the words very well, but this is Senegambia here. This was a major region out of which African Muslims were exported. And then you had what was referred to in the literature as the Windward Coast, which would include the coastal part of Guinea and Sierra Leone, as well as this area here, the Bight of Benin or Benin. This is what is now southwestern, this is the portal area of what is now southwestern Nigeria. And so I'm going to come back to that momentarily. Islam begins to move into sub-Saharan West Africa as early as the 9th century by way of trade, commerce. It early on becomes the religion of merchants and both from North Africa, also living in the arid region, as well as this transitional region known as the Sahel or the Sahel, as it's been anglicized, and also the Savannah. And so slowly it becomes the religion of both a mercantile and ruling elite, such that by the 15th century of the Common Era, you have essentially polities stretching from the Atlantic coast all the way over to Lake Chad. But anyway, it should be in this area here. All the way to Lake Chad by the 15th century, polities are being governed by Muslims, Muslim politics, Muslim movement. So the religion begins to take hold. And then we move into a period in the 18th and 19th century, a period of reform, which is characterized throughout West Africa by a series of holy wars. And one of the polities that emerges in this context is Futajalon, which is a serious struggle which breaks out in what is now Guinea in the 1720s, culminating in the 1770s. It is preceded by a state that I studied for my first book in what is now Eastern Senegal, known as the state of Guinea, which is established toward the end of the 17th century. There will be massive social movements which will stretch throughout West Africa, arguably culminating most significantly in the Jihad, the Holy War, Muslim Dan Folio in northern Nigeria, 1804 to 1812, but there are also very significant movements taking place across the expanse of West Africa, one of those most important being led by an individual named El Hajjoma. The Holy War that takes place in the Guinea Massif in the 1720s results in this very, very important state known as Futajalon. It is a theocracy. Abdul Rahman is one of the scions of a major leader of Futajalon. And so what's really interesting about this is that as a consequence of the intensification of the transatlantic slave trade, the tentacles of the trade begin to reach further and further into the interior, such that both non-Muslims and Muslims are caught up in the trade and find themselves in various places. In the case of Abdul Rahman, he will find himself in Mississippi. But insofar as North America is concerned, there's a significant Muslim population that locates along the Georgia-South Carolina littoral or coast, the low country there. And you will find Muslims scattered throughout North America as well. I should say something that, and I'm kind of racing through, I'm sorry about this, but I want to kind of give you as much context as possible. But what I should also say is that one of the things that's in the film, and about which there's some discussion, is this notion of Abdul Rahman being a Moor. And this is very, very significant. Hopefully we can have a conversation about this subsequently, because he is Fulbe. He is Hal Pular, and speaker of Pular. But that does not negate the fact that indeed there were North Africans who were exported out of Africa into the Americas. And they're not a large number, but they were there. And it connects with a long discussion about Moorish identity in North America, so we can have that conversation later on. But Muslims will arrive in North America. They will also be exported into Central America, in what becomes Spanish-speaking America, where they will develop a very poor reputation. They will be seen as evil. They will be vilified. This is in part a consequence of the circumstances or conditions in which they arrive. That is, they will initially arrive in Hispaniola, where in the 16th and 17th centuries they will engage in any number of insurrections and revolts. In Hispaniola, in Costa Rica, it becomes Costa Rica, Panama, so forth and so on. They will also develop a similar kind of adversarial reputation in Brazil, where matters tend to culminate in the 19th century in a very famous revolt known as the 1835 Malay Revolt, which takes place in the city of Salvador in what is now Bahia. We can talk about that. But the point I want to stress here is that the struggle between African Muslims and others in Spanish-speaking America, Lusophone America, really relates to the struggle between Muslims and Christians and Jews in Iberia from 1711 to 1492. It was a very, very long period of time, as you know. Very important, prominent Muslim presence in both Portugal and Spain. And so, to some extent, this is what happens in the Americas is a kind of continuation of this earlier situation. In the English-speaking Caribbean, however, Muslims develop a very different kind of reputation. Now, throughout the Americas, Muslims will engage in revolt, will run away, will engage in acts of sabotage, and so forth and so on. But in the English-speaking Caribbean, they do develop this, this reputation as being highly self-reliant, independent, autonomous. They tended to pool their resources, buy one another's freedom, buy property, engage in agriculture. Very different kind of reputation develops in the Caribbean. And so we can, English-speaking Caribbean, we can talk about that. The final thing I'd like to say is that, of course, there was a very important revolution which takes place in the island of Saint-Domingue, which becomes Haiti from the latter part of the 18th into the 19th century. We do have some documentation which suggests and demonstrates that Muslims were involved in that revolt. And it's very vague. We don't have a lot to go on, but this is an area that requires more research. Finally, what's really interesting is that I will make the suggestion that there is a connection between what you see in the 19th century North America and what you see in contemporary North America. And that is that there is a connectivity here between this earlier generation of Muslims and contemporary generation of Muslims. And we can talk about that in the Q&A, but this is an important phase. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. Now, I think we're ready for the film, right? So we're going to watch the film. After the film, we have the panel discussion. Then later on, we have the treats, food, and also we have Leonardo, who's going to play some saxophone, some music for us. Okay. It's a great story of Prince Abdul Rahman Ibrahima. A great story about separation from a homeland, separation from his family, and also a journey to an unknown, But I think he did not stop, his hope for his life. So he started a new life in the new world, and he had his hopes. But later on, as we have followed from the story, again there was another separation now to the other side. He wanted to reach out to his family in his homeland in Africa. But what is, I think, great about the story is the legacy of the prince, which his legacy continues with his grandchildren living in the Americas. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to talk about his story and how this story could, open up new avenues, new ideas for us. Now we're gonna start, continue our program, the last part of our program, with a panel discussion. I would like to invite our panelists, Mr. Eric Tait. Stories are very important in our personal lives, but it is also important for the future of our nation. The story of Martin Luther King made a great impact, not only in America, but also in the whole world. His story has made a big change in the United States, the whole world in many different ways. For example, we're proud to say that our president, Barack Obama, now is an African-American descent, and he is elected as the president of the United States. The stories of Martin Luther King and many others has changed our understanding of freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, which are one of the strongest pillars of our nation. Likewise, I believe that the story of Abdul Rahman Ibrahima Sori can and will make a big difference in our perspectives, thoughts, and feelings towards understanding the multicultural, multi-religious dynamics of our society at large in the United States and around the globe. His story tells us that the enslaved African American experience in the Americas, but also it tells us that the Muslims in the United States are not immigrants who migrated to this country in the 19th or 20th century. On the contrary, Muslims, African American Muslims, are the builders of this nation, and they are one of the first settlers of this country and sacrificed a lot for this nation. So, as a Turkish American, I can't appreciate more for what they have contributed to the making of this nation. Now, I would like to introduce our panel. First, Mr. Eric Tait. He is a veteran broadcast journalist and documentarian. His credits include ABC World News Tonight, Nightline 2020, Entertainment Tonight, and the ABC News Our World documentary series. He is the executive producer and director of the award-winning radio documentary series, Every Voice and Sing, and the multiple award-winning Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home, radio and television documentary series. Among other works, Mr. Tait has produced and directed the following award-winning documentaries have aired on PBS: Across the River with Hendrik Smith, and The Legacy of Maggie's American Dream, as well as Fire in Their Eyes. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Eric Tait. And let me introduce our second panel, Imam Yusuf Ramadan, who has served as the resident Imam of the historic Masjid Nuruddin and the Director of Education for the Clara Muhammad School of Queens, New York since 2000 upon the death of Imam Qasim Bukruddin. The property was originally purchased by El Haj Malik El Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X. Imam Ramadan previously taught English, Islamic Studies, and Social Studies at Clara Muhammad School of Queens for 10 years from 1980 to 1990. He has been a member of the community and a student of the late Islamic leader Imam Muhammad for 35 years. He has been the host of the New Day for Al-Islam in America radio show for the past 4 years on WPAT 9:30 a.m. in the New York City metropolitan area and on American Muslim 360 block talk radio for close to 1 year. Please welcome Imam Yusuf Ramadan. Now, I would like to give the speech to Mr. Tait for your presentation. You could do it over there. Okay.
Mike? Yeah, we're good. Thank you for coming. I'm as Mehmet said, documentarian by profession, longtime broadcast journalist, and the last panel discussion that we dealt with, we talked about the actual impact of slavery on the enslaved, and of course, the value of that enslaved property, quote, property, to the development economically of the United States of America, and of course, the value of the character, culture, and contributions of those enslaved individuals to social, economic, cultural, you name it, development of who we are as a nation and a people. Prince Among Slaves gives you a graphic example of the strata of individuals who were captured and brought to this country. The captors had absolutely no thought, care, and could care less about who those individuals were. And as this documentary plainly shows, Foster couldn't really care who he had bought, who he had purchased, as long as that particular acquisition made a profit for him, period. That's all his care and all his concern was about. You can multiply Foster by just about every slave-holding person in North America, South America, wherever slavery was practiced. Now, a contrasting side to that coin, which is amply illustrated, are the individuals who tried, no matter what, to maintain their sense of self, self-worth, personal dignity, and identity. Now, all that cultural sense of self that makes up one's identity is what most slave-holding societies try to destroy in the people that they enslave. And so someone, not necessarily a prince, who is enslaved will use whatever trick, whatever tactic, whatever tool they can in order to maintain that sense of self. 30, 40, I forget how many years ago, when that epic series hit American television, Roots, the name Kunta Kinte came into the lexicon. And the reason it resonated so much was they used that particular figure to drive home how an individual refuses, despite circumstances that are totally beyond his control or her control, to give up their sense of self, to give up their sense of identity. And what I loved about this film is there wasn't a lot of talk about slave revolts. There wasn't a lot of talk, except for that initial, stop and think. You're in a strange land. You have been enslaved. You see no way out. And guess what? You make a successful escape, right? He did. He had no maroon colony that he could go to for succor and shelter. In early Americas, when our folk escaped from slavery, they would go to the Native Americans. And so you would have Native American villages, settlements, who would welcome those escaping Africans. And they built up. Long before the Underground Railroad, there was an Underground Railroad. I can tell you that. From the 1600s, folks were leaving the plantations and heading west, north, south, wherever there were communities that would shelter them. And it's a long, long history. Rahman had no connections with whatever native villages were in his area. and had no way to get to them. And they still didn't capture him. That's how resourceful he was. That's not played up in this documentary. You hear, he's gone. They don't find him, they give up. You don't get a sense of how resourceful he had to be to stay out there, what he had to do to get his food, get his shelter, stay away from their dogs. But they're not tracking him just by themselves. There are dogs out there trying to find this runaway slave. And he still manages to stay out on his own. You're talking serious smarts, serious ingenuity, serious will to not succumb to someone trying to take your freedom. When he makes up his mind, he's not going to fight a one-man war, he's not going to try anything, and he comes back, he then has to make a psychological shift in how he's going to accommodate to a society that does not value him at all and still value himself. That's the message of this film. Are we as individuals, despite those kinds of, obstacle is even a stronger word, despite those type of negative circumstances, manage to rise physically, psychologically, spiritually, and maintain our own sense of self and dignity. And it's played out across the continents, South, Central, North America. I've got a series called And I'll Be Free to Travel Home, and we trace the entire structure from the 1600s to today on all those things that you don't hear about, the slave revolts at sea. You don't read too much about them. You go out to governments, how many of those? Very few in the history books, at least 200, 250 at sea. I'm always, how to phrase it, I'm always afraid that the sense of how much strength internally, psychologically, spiritually, that the enslaved people actually had to inure themselves with and had to maintain and had to continue over a long course of this, quote, peculiar institution that we suffered through. I'm always worried that that journey and that triumph doesn't get captured with the strength and the potency that it deserves. This is a very fine example of it. The other side of the coin are those other, you hear about Nat Turner's revolt, and you hear about Gabriel Prosser's revolt, and you don't hear about the New York revolt of 1712. How many years there was a slave revolt in New York? Wait. 1, 2, 1712, the first New York slave revolt. And 1741, the second, quote, Great Negro Conspiracy. And they seldom show up in the history books because the nature of the historical retelling of slavery is that the African Americans that were enslaved were very docile and very happy, and so there weren't very many slave revolts. Nothing could be further from the truth of that. But that being said, I don't want to take up too much time. If you have any questions on the flip side of the human dignity on the actual positive revolts, I can give you some examples if we want to get into that side of the discussion.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Tait. Now it's Imam Yusuf Ramadan.
And I'd like to thank the Turkish Cultural Center and New York Institute of Technology for inviting us back again. We enjoyed the last one very much at the NYIT. And I also participated in a panel discussion at the Turkish Cultural Center of Queens, where I hail from. And I really appreciate the theme of this particular discussion, which is the focus on the importance of Black or African American youth understanding their personal identity and history. And what I gleaned from the film this time, and I say this time because each time I see the film, I see something different that strikes my attention and that I see as being very important. And you know, history is like that. Perspective is everything, you know, point of view. And what stands out for me is the ability of Abdul Rahman and others, because he's an example. He's just an outstanding example of that. Regardless as to the perception that people had from him from the outside, he refused to give up his own sense of self-worth as a human being, first and foremost, as a human being and someone deserving of his humanity and deserving of the dignity that humanity confers upon him and everyone. It also strikes me when I see the cognitive dissonance of the slave masters, of how on the one hand they can be described as religious people, spiritual people, family-oriented people, people who love their own families, and you saw that portrayed with Mr. Foster and his own family and his quest to provide his family with financial, economic security. But he's able to divorce that from his treatment of other people. And I think that speaks to what Dr. Gomez was saying about the reverberations that we see today, something that we can see going on today when people are able to justify their own quest for finances, regardless as to the consequences for other people. And then that be described as capitalism, and therefore, you know, it must be okay, it must be all right. So that's what I really appreciate about it, and also we see that same tendency to blame the victim when we see certain aspirants for the office of the president, when they look around and they looking for examples of people who are receiving profits, undue profits. They're making much more than they deserve. And they pick out the custodians or the janitors from the school system. They're the ones who would certainly appear to be making undeserved profits. They can't see anybody else that's doing that. And so therefore, their job should be given up, and it should be given to the African American youth who clearly, according to them, don't know the value of work or a paycheck, you know. And when we look at these statistics of unemployment, particularly of African American men here in New York City, close to 50%, you know. There's a tendency, as we saw in the film, that they referred to Abdul Rahman as ungrateful, you know, when clearly he had so much to be grateful for, you know. So these are just some, you know, observances that I got from this particular screening of it. And also, I believe that Dr. Gomez, I think they made mention, they said that Abdul Rahman had himself participated in selling of slaves.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. Well, they mentioned that Abdul Rahman had himself participated in selling of slaves, you know. And we have to be very careful, you know, about that, because the transatlantic slave trade is referred to as a peculiar institution. Now, there's some revisionist history going on now that, you know, seeks to redefine what that actually means, you know. But clearly, when we see what took place, and they made mention of other people. You could look anywhere on the map and find slavery, but you won't find this particular brand of slavery. This is unique, where the cultural identity, the religious identity, you know, the family identity is the whole attempt is to wipe that out from the memory. You know, in that sense, the transatlantic slave trade is unique in the history of so-called slavery. So we have to be very careful when we, you know, look at it and say, well, you know, at some point we know the word slave is, you know, from the word Slav, but you know, we don't see any other history, any other slavery that matches that in terms of trying to erase a person's past, you know, and really taking away their identity, which is so important. Without your personal identity, really, you know, what do you have? So that when we see him being returned, they returned him where? To Monrovia, Liberia, which, because of them not knowing where many of the slaves came from, where you couldn't repatriate them, you know, with any certainty, he knew where he was from. In that regard, he was very fortunate, because many of us, we don't know where we're from, you know, precisely, and there's been a lot of work that's going on that made it a lot easier in recent years. But the point is, you know, even today, when I talk to a lot of my brothers, say, where are you from? They say, Africa. Africa is a continent. These are African brothers that are here from, you know, and then they say, oh, I'm from so-and-so. So that personal identity, which we can, you know, talk about a little bit more, and the value of history, because as was mentioned, the masjid, or the mosque that I'm the resident imam at, was purchased by Malcolm Little. That's the name that's on the deed. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X, you know. And it was my attraction to him as a young man in the 60s growing up. You know, back then, we didn't have video games and things like that. But, you know, during the summer, we read the autobiography of Malcolm X without it being assigned to us by our teachers. You know, we were attracted to that because of the great presence of Malcolm, you know, of the impression that he had made, I would say almost unique impression that he made upon me, and seeing the journey that he took, and the place where he came from, and his ability to transcend those circumstances, you know, certainly discrimination and segregation and street life and prison, etc. And his ability to transcend that and to come out looking like the wonderful specimen of a human being, you know. That was very attractive to me at the time. I wasn't interested in Malcolm as because so much he was a Muslim. That wasn't what really attracted me. But because he had recaptured his humanity and his dignity, that's what really spoke to me. And I see the same thing in Abdul Rahman. Thank you.
The floor is open for you, for your questions. Since we would like this to be a dialogue, so your questions will be very much appreciated. So any questions from the audience to the panel? If you could please just introduce
I can
yourself.
speak louder. First of all, this is the first of kind that I've seen that I know most of African stories never been spoken. I love Malcolm X. And when I came here, as you mentioned, African Muslims paid the way for me, and that's a great story. Coming back to the story of Abdul Rahman, I think when he went back after this escape, he went back with a degree of certainty that he has established certain amount of respect between his owner and himself, that he was confident enough to go back. That's something that he knew was what this culture offered him, and that he was a great asset for this man to build his empire back around. Really summarize the entire history of slavery.
Okay, we can get another question. You know, if there are questions, gentleman over here,
Yes,
right here. If you could please just speak to the microphone, because if you could speak to the microphone and introduce yourself
Thank you.
first.
The concept of identity has been used so frequently by everyone here, and I was concerned because I think maybe a little history would have helped had we known that the conspiracy that took place from the time the slave ships began to leave was to ensure that the identity was taken. And so as today, and as I listened to you, I remember you talked about Malcolm. We spent a few years together, 3. And we used to go around about some situations. But I'm saying that unless the identity piece is really addressed, we're going to still be caught in the problem. So the last 40 years I've spent addressing the issue of identity. And I just want to know how you all felt about it, because one, in Nigeria last year when Danny Glover and Ritter came to Nigeria, they said, well, you're a chief in Africa. We're going to be a chief. What can you do? I said, first, you know your identity. You're going by your identity to know who you were. And I gave him a brief history that before Rome to do, he was Igbo. And I said, the study that we've done here at the Cultural Education Institute, which I established years ago, focus on the tribal aspects. And we have sufficient, to establish that of the 45 million African Americans here in America, of Igbo identity, tribal identity. But I'm only saying that is that one, a little more focus on identity and identifying who we are would be greatly helpful. And then you could take it further to understand the spiritual piece and whatever. So I just want to know how you all felt about that aspect of addressing the issue of identity and film did some of it. I didn't mean to get on and ramble on, but I just thought since the young man did speak to George Malcolm, and I spent time with him, and also the time that I spent 40 years back and forth in Africa, the identity issue, I thought should have been addressed a little bit more. Thank you, and pardon me for taking so much time.
I think we have a question here, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Hassan Ali. My question is, it's 2 questions actually. So one is whether the Muslims and Arabs that participated in the slave trade, were they culturally or racially different than the Africans that were being enslaved at the time? And the second question is, I think Dr. Gomez mentioned that there were wars going on in Iberia, right?
Yes.
Right. So, and the context of those wars were between Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and you said that was the it's kind of like the setup for what's going on now. Could you explain that more? Could you get into that a little bit more?
Okay.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'll bring it up a little closer. Okay. 2 very good questions. I think they relate to the gentleman's question who preceded you. I'll try to be succinct. So, you know, early in the history of Islam, there's a bit of a break in the 8th century, right? And the Umayyad dynasty is established in Spain. Okay. That begins a very long Muslim presence, 711 to 1492, during which Muslims are in control of a significant portion of the peninsula. That demographic is an interesting one because it tends to have an Arab leadership, but it is composed as well of North Africans, Berbers, as well as West Africans, okay, who are, and there's more research coming to light with respect to the role of West Africans in the Iberian situation. Okay, so what happens is both the Portuguese and the Spanish, while they are antagonistic to the Muslim community, also develop a deep respect and admiration for that community. And in fact, it's in Iberia, and it's through Muslim scholars, right, that Europe kind of reconnects with its own past, because it's Muslim scholars who are studying antiquity, and they are translating Greek and Latin text into Arabic. All right, and then European scholars are reading the Arabic text and learning about their own past. There are a number of other things taking place in Iberia. I mean, Iberia is also the site at which Europe begins to amass the kind of technology which is being borrowed from the Indian Ocean, such as the use of the lateen sail, techniques of tacking and so forth, which will allow them, all right, to begin to move through the Atlantic Ocean. So what's happening in Iberia, both culturally and technologically, is very, very important to the subsequent development of Europe. I'm not going to go so far as to say that, you know, the Renaissance is based upon what happens in Iberia, but there's a strong connection there, right? Yeah. So what I'm saying, therefore, is that when the Spanish and the Portuguese come into the quote-unquote New World, and there they begin to take in these African Muslims, they're familiar with the religion, and they have a sense of who they're dealing with, and they make the distinctions. If you read the literature, the primary documentation, they are very aware of the fact that these people are Muslim, and they will distinguish between Muslim and non-Muslim Africans. Now, this relates to your earlier question. One of the things that we have to understand about Africa is that it contains the most diverse population on the planet, and that area, the shore, the Sahel, right, between desert and the savannah, was an area in which you had populations coming together, meeting, gathering, intermingling, intermarrying, and so forth. Okay, Berber, Tuareg, Arab populations. You had people from Isfahan, all right, from the so-called Middle East or Near East, Central Islamic lands as well, who are moving across North Africa, across Egypt, across North Africa, through the trades, the Saharan trading areas, and settling in the Sahel and intermarrying with the people there. All right. So consequently, when you begin to examine what the ruling families, the claims that the ruling families make about their heritage, from Senegambia all the way over to Kano, Katsina, the Lake Chad region, and so forth, many of them maintain that they come from someplace in the Central Islamic lands. The interaction is extensive in that area. There will be a conference at Duke University in the spring about this, and with respect to the whole business of the heterogeneic quality of the African population. All right. The point I'm trying to make is that prior to the transatlantic trade, it was not a situation in which Africans had no contact with the outside world. Right? There were Muslims from other parts of the world who were not only trading and visiting, but they were also settling, okay, in the Sahel and even parts of the savannah. In addition, Muslims were also making Hajj on a regular basis. So they were very well aware of. I mean, obviously, the most famous would be the Hajj of Mansa Musa in the 14th century. Made a big splash across the world. So my point is that if you were to visit Timbuktu today, it's a very interesting situation, right, in which it's very difficult as an outsider to really know who's who, all right, because very dark-skinned people, all right, are Tuareg, right? Very dark-skinned people, all right, claim to be descendants from the Prophet. As you know, the Moroccans invade Songhai in 1591 and take over the Songhai Empire. Many of the Moroccans remain, established families there. Many of the people in the Moroccan army are not Moroccans. Many of the people in the Moroccan army are Europeans, Spaniards, who established themselves in West Africa. It's a small population, but they're there. I'm simply trying to make the point. All right, so that when you get to when you get to people like the Halpular, the speakers of Pula, who go by various names, the Fula, the Fulani, the Fulbe, and so forth. Slaveholders tend to distinguish these people and the Mandinka from other African populations because they appear to be physically different. And so there's a long history, and there's quite a bit of study that's been done on this. And so, and it goes in the and it's also true in reverse, right? Such that there are many sub-Saharan African communities who move north, all right, into Morocco, into Algeria, certainly southern Algeria. The phenomenon that we just witnessed in Libya with Gaddafi is nothing new. There have been so-called black Africans, if you will, sub-Saharan Africans in Libya for a long, long time. A long time. So it's a complicated question. But yeah, those distinctions were made. I'm sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you very much. We have a question right here.
Yeah, how you doing? My name is Tyrone Anthony. I'm from the Manhattan branch, NACP. And thank you, Ahmed, for this forum. Because the more knowledge and history we have, the more we educate ourselves on our identity also. The question I want to ask is, there was something entered my mind during the film, and they talked about Timbuktu. And it seems that Ahmad, he got his learning. He was learning, he knew how to read, he knew how to write. And Timbuktu, from what I heard in history, might have been a big learning place at one time in the ancient times. And my second question is, what passed my mind was the ship Amistad when I saw them on the ship. And that was a time where it was a Spanish ship. So if you could, it might have been a little difference or different times, so could you collaborate on that? Thank you.
Evening. Timbuktu was a major center of learning. Timbuktu, Guinea, Gao, Ja. There were many centers of learning. Timbuktu begins to emerge as a center of learning during the early 14th century under Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali. He will establish Timbuktu as he begins to establish Timbuktu as a major center of learning, such that during Songhai, into the latter part of the 16th century, it is a very serious center, so much so that you have North African students coming to Timbuktu to study. And so, and this is something that I work with to some extent. There's a huge, huge project going on in places like Mali in particular, the West African Arabic Manuscript Project, where thousands of documents have been assembled, both in the government library as well as a number of private collections. In Timbuktu, in Guinea. In Guinea, the documents are located, have been amassed in a building right across from the central mosque. But these documents are everywhere, thousands and thousands of them. And it will take an army of people, these documents are being digitized, preserved, etc., cataloged and so forth. But it's going to take a lot of work to get through them. But the history, there's a lot of history in it. It's not just history, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, obviously the Islamic sciences are represented with hadith and so on and so forth, but there's a lot there, yeah, so.
And they actually, there were a number of other major centers of culture and learning on the African continent prior to the transatlantic slave trade. So you shouldn't be surprised. Within the Middle Passage, let's just call it the Middle Passage, there was an attempt originally not to bring those enslaved Africans directly to North America initially. They would take them to the Caribbean. They would take them into those islands like Curacao and places like that, and quote, condition them there so that by the time they were then transported onto the mainland of North America, they were more, quote, inclined to be accepting of their fate. So they talked in the film about the ship landing somewhere initially and then coming up to being transported up to Natchez. That's part of a cyclical a cycle that they did. The Dutch, for example, would definitely put their initial enslaved Africans in the islands like Curacao and other places that they own. Peter Stuyvesant, while he was running New Amsterdam, was also the governor of Curacao. And Stuyvesant, contrary to most of the Dutch plans about the slave trade, originally the Dutch didn't really want New Amsterdam to be a major slave trading port at all. They didn't even want to traffic in slaves in New Amsterdam. They actually passed a tax that said, you know, if you do that, you've got to pay 10 guilders or 10 something. I forget what the exact sum was. So they could discourage that. But when Stuyvesant became the governor or the head guy in charge of New Amsterdam while he was in Curacao, he sort of got the sense that rather than having accidental slavery in New Amsterdam, he might be able to turn New Amsterdam into an actual slave trading port. And so it turned out, unfortunately for him at the time when he was deciding to import this larger cadre of slaves in 1664, that's when the English decided they wanted his colony. So it turned out by an accident of fate that he had like 280 enslaved Africans on board a ship called the Guinea in the harbor, and the English ships were out there with their guns, and his patroons or whoever the burghers were said, well, we're not going to fight a war for the Dutch West India Company's profits. So they just surrendered New Amsterdam to the English without a shot being fired.
Is there a question, Jim?
Yes, for Professor Gomez. For Professor Gomez, you know, I think we would all agree that slavery is one of the greatest things against humanity ever. But my question is, since the Africans were the ones who suffered the most through this transatlantic slavery and all, why is it that slavery today is still continued in Africa by Africans on Africans when they suffered so much from it themselves?
Well, this is an excellent question, and what I would simply say very quickly is that in places like Mauritania, you have a kind of ongoing situation in which those who have historically been in power and been slaveholders, okay, don't make the kind of identification that you've just made. That is to say, I have a graduate student, well, she's no longer my student, she graduated and has a job and so forth and so on. But she's a Japanese national. And she remarked that she didn't know she was Asian until she came to the United States. So the concept of being an African, all right, we really need to examine that, because it was not necessarily the case that because everyone was on the continent, they necessarily saw each other as being, you know, the same people, you know, being related to the same community and so forth. And as a matter of fact, what the transatlantic slave trade itself is indicative of the ability of external forces to manipulate these differences, okay? And to highlight cultural differences and regional differences and so forth and so on, so that people who were not necessarily at odds with one another for any reason, you live on this side of the river, I live on this side of the other side of the river, all of a sudden are fighting, okay, in order to feed the demands of the transatlantic slave trade. So in the situation of Mauritania, we have a circumstance in which Moors, okay, do not necessarily see themselves as being the same as a group of people known as the Bella, okay, who are the descendants of persons who had been enslaved long ago and continue in a kind of servile relationship. They don't see themselves as necessarily occupying this, they don't necessarily see themselves as being the same people, even though they're all Muslim. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, that would be my simple explanation. It probably is much more complicated, but I think that goes down, that goes to the root of it. That is that people don't necessarily see themselves as the same people, you know. So.
And then again, as I mentioned before, slavery, it doesn't equal slavery. Okay, it's not just all slavery. You can't categorize it like that. The worst enslavement is the enslavement of the will or the spirit. And then the enslavement of the intelligence, you know, the mind, the free will. That's what makes a human being. Lastly, it's the enslavement of the physical person, the ability to have mobility, you see. So that, as I said before, the world has never seen that type of slavery that was suffered by those that were brought to the so-called New World, where your cultural identity was erased. Your language was erased. You were forbidden to speak your language. You were forbidden to even have your name, the name of your ancestors, or to practice your religion, etc. So that's why it was so very important that that identity be held on to by Abdul Rahman and those that he represents. So it's more, you know, the enslavement as in what he mentioned, you know, and there's that other piece about, Muslims practicing, you know, putting other people into physical servitude, whatever the case may be. And we see, so the problem with that is, you know, I have a favorite saying that Muslims do everything everybody else does. Wherever you see the word Muslim, just erase that and put human. Huh? They're human beings, you see? But that doesn't mean that Islam advocates that. Huh? Most of us, I was born a Christian. And if you know, I went to Catholic schools, etc. Graduated, you know, from Catholic high school. But if you were to ask me or most people to really tell you, you know, what is Christianity? You ask 1,000 people, you get 1,000 different answers. You ask Muslims, you know, what is Islam? You know, some will say it's peace, some will say it's submission, etc. But the point is that, and there are those who say that Islam encouraged slavery. That's not true. Because if you are a Muslim, you are Abdullah. Abd has been translated as servant or even slave of God. And so it's translated that way to say that, you know, that La ilaha illallah, that there's no God except, there's nothing worthy of worship except God. So the first word is a lie, saying no, I'm not going to worship anything. I don't accept anything above me other than God. You see? So people distort things in their practice, you know, and we know that even during the time of Rasulullah, praise and peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad, that he had to raise their consciousness in relation to Bilal, who was an African, you see? And even after the death of the Prophet, Bilal left because he realized that the people had not been educated enough. They hadn't come so far in their thinking to, you know. So, but the other point that Hassan brought out and Dr. Gomez was talking about, race is, you know, there's only one race. That's the human race. Huh? These are political and social constructs. So, you know, it's very curious that, you know, I can recall my parents telling me that during the 50s or 60s, you know, immigrants would come here from Cuba, and they could be, as we say, black as the ace of spades. And they would say they were white. And they would have white on their birth certificate. You see? So, as Dr. Gomez was referring to, you know, it's really, they imposed identity. They decided, then they got that one, you know, one drop of black blood rule. They said if you had one drop of black blood, you were, you know, I'm 1/8. I mean, how can you determine such a thing? Octoroons and all of these. So, you know, that same thing takes place. You know, when I was in Saudi Arabia, I saw men and women that were much darker than me, jet black. And they were offended when I asked them where they were from. They said, I'm from here. Huh? And I said, where's your grandfather from? And they said, here. Well, you know, they did the same thing to me. Then when they saw me, they would say, Nigeria? No. You know, and I say, America. I'm from America. And they say, no one is from America. Where are you really from? Where's your grandfather from? So it's a very tricky subject, Hassan, and you know, we're still learning a lot about it, you know, but the reality is, you know, the more we learn to accept one another, that we're all human. We're human beings, you know.
Thank you. I would like
one point. The other reality about this bit about slavery, you have to stop focusing on the African continent as the only place practicing slavery. The human trafficking problem, forget the name slavery. You just focus on human trafficking, and you got a global problem that's so widespread you can't even begin to quantify it. That's how bad things are in 2012. Okay?
we're running out of time, so I'd like to get two questions. First, this gentleman, and you know, Faraj.
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim. Yes, I am Muslim. I'm also a citizen of the world. That's how I see myself. And yes, I visit Mali. I know Tobacco, Dr. Gomez. You please help me understand. I'm just trying to learn more. This is my first visit here. So I'm just trying to learn more about the interest about Turkish Cultural Center hosting this year. I'm familiar with Turkey. I know the history from the education there, how they teach Arabics, the Arabs, and how they learn from earlier. Could you please just elaborate about that? Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things. It's a Turkish Cultural Center. Why, you know, like organizing such events. Now we established another institution which is called Peace Islands Institute, because when we say Turkish Cultural Center, so there is an ethnicity, Turkish ethnicity, and culture is there. So things that are not related to culture, what's coming there. So what actually is an answer to the question. So now we establish another institution which is called Peace Island Institute, which the topics that are not related to Turkish culture or to Turkish ethnicity, so we're going to see separating it. It's established, but this is our kind of like a maybe, you know, like our last you know, programs. But other than that, I think like what I could say, like let me just share one of my experiences in Brooklyn. There's a school, Turkish American school called Brooklyn Emily School. One day I was in the school, I was a teacher there, and then somebody, an African American, he came into the school and says, "Hello, welcome," and then says, "Merhaba abi," "Hello, brother," in Turkish. And I said, okay, maybe it's, he just know a little bit Turkish, and I started talking to Turkish to him, and then he was answering in Turkish, but without an accent. And then he said, "I'm your brother-in-law." And I said, "How come I have only 2 brother-in-laws?" And then he says, "Because I got married to a Turkish woman in Turkey." And then, "How come?" And then he said, "I'm from Nigeria," and he moved to Turkey for maybe for more than 15 years. He studied science, medicine, and he got married to a Turkish woman over there. Then he kind of kept living in Turkey, Then they had children, so they kind of visiting the U.S. And since they knew that there's a Turkish American school, they wanted to visit the school. So what I want, and then this is my personal story over here. And another thing is that the Turkish people, in the Ottoman Empire is an empire of many cultures, many religions, many ethnicities. And the Ottoman Empire, was in Asia, Europe, and Africa. And for example, there has been a great population of Turkish people who moved to Yemen, to Ethiopia, to Morocco, and then they lived there. They got married to the local people over there, so they had cultural or interfaith marriages there. So to me, to touch upon topics of this topic or any other topics, it is not really that I'm not really related, because it's coming from our heritage as well. Because just like you say, when you say African, it shouldn't be a label for the diversity within Africa. So many different people, maybe one side and the other side of the river, completely different people. In Turkey, when you say Turkish, we are not one only ethnicity. We have ethnically divided, religiously, culturally. For example, I'm Turkish, my wife, she's Kurdish. Now our kids are Turkish, Kurdish, and American, So this is how diverse, how mixed our cultures are in this global world. So I don't know if this answers the question. And maybe last question.
Yeah, my name is Leonardo. I'm the saxophone for the evening. And I think this is a beautifully rich experience for anybody, whether you're from the United States or not. My background is so strange: Cuban, Jamaican, English. I live in Brazil. So as a musician, I have this open soul, and your answer was perfect. There's only one race, the human race. That's me.
I know that the time is, very limited. I just would like to give maybe a last final, words to Zeki Bey. If you could just elaborate lastly, what was the motivation, why you made this movie? I know you made a movie every year, so why did Yunus Production Foundation want to make this movie? What was the message?
Hi again. Well, when they made the movie, I was not in it yet. I've been working for them for about 3 years now. But as far as I know, the story was in the minds of our producers, Alex Kornemer and Michael Wolf, for a while. They knew about the book written by Terry Alford. And also, the decides to bring stories about contemporary Muslims in the contemporary society, but also in the history as well. But up until this film, I think they made it in 2007, up until that film, they didn't really touch upon anything about history besides the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So they wanted to really bring a story back from the history shelf. It was not even in their history shelf, to be honest with you. It was not mentioned by many people. So this was an opportunity for them to really make a film and documentary film about it. And we continue to do so since 2007. And I wanted to make another actual announcement as you are going to be exiting and actually enjoying your food, you can feel free to come and talk to me about the film and more details about our other films. You can pick up your film, free DVD as well. But also I wanted to mention, if there are any teachers today here with us, we have, as the Black History Month approaches, we have great sources available at UPF. We're starting a campaign related to Prince Rahman films and other films. We're giving them out to teachers and nationwide. We're trying to distribute them to many classrooms and trying to teach these things to students as well. We work with teachers extensively, so that's something that I would like to talk to those who are teachers. Please come and see me.
All right, thank you so very much for the panel, for our keynote speaker and other partners. Thank you so much for the audience for being so patient and being with us on this Friday.